Invest Africa, proudly brought to you by KPMG.
Welcome back to Invest Africa. Remember, we value your suggestions and feedback, so please send us an email to investafrica@abn360.com or interact with us on Twitter through @CNBC Africa, #InvestAfrica. Still with me to explore Port Louis' investment case are my guest Colin Grieve, Chief Representative Officer at Fraser Bank, and in our MBC studios is Shamima Mallam-Hassam, Senior Director at Mauritius Board of Investments, and we are now joined by Randir Manik, Head of Operations for African Alliance Asset Management. Thank you so much for joining us, Randir. Now, Shamima, let me throw this question to you as well. You spoke about a very huge investment in education and how this is paying off. Can you give us a little bit more indication of how the human resource capacity in Mauritius is supporting the evolution of the economy?
If you look at how the sector has evolved and you look at the diversification in terms of the strategy of the government, I think at every step the government has ensured that we do have the appropriate resources in place to make sure that the sectors are being developed. In the ICT BPO sector today, we have different programs that have been set up for the support in terms of development of the human capacity. In the financial services, if you look at the number of ACCA today that are in Mauritius, you'd see that the number is considerably increasing. So a lot of investment is being put in terms of the development of the human capital, and also the government is supporting by putting up different schemes that would enable and sustain the companies to develop the human capacity.
Randir, now, if an investor was looking at the case of whether to list on the same DEX or not, can you give us an indication of the benefits of listing in Mauritius as against other sub-Saharan economies?
Mauritius has a range of DTAs. It counts 17 DTAs with African countries. So if you invest in Africa through Mauritius, you end up being exempted from capital gain tax, and you don't pay inheritance tax, or you don't pay withholding tax on interest and dividend. More and more we see the global business sector providing value-added services, which means you can do activities like asset management in the island, fund management in the island. So these are the benefits that someone gets by working with the global business sector.
Of course, Randir, we've also seen the Mauritian economy evolve over time. Can you give more detail around the asset classes that have attracted the most foreign investor activity?
Yeah. We see the global business sector has been essentially working for investment in India. We've been given an extension of 3 years, and the country has built its competencies in the global business sector, and we need to use these competencies to be able to offer instruments, investment in Africa. We see more and more of these funds being set up in Mauritius, private equity funds being set up in Mauritius for infrastructural projects in Africa. So the competencies that have been built over time can now be used, for investment in Africa.
And now, Colin, back to you here in Johannesburg. It seems as if what's enabled Mauritius to continuously reinvent itself is this ability to adapt and to consistently innovate. Can you give us some idea of what the banking sector in particular is looking at in terms of moving forward? What are the innovative products and services that we're likely to see from that particular sector in Mauritius?
Okay. Yes, I think Mauritius' ability to adapt has been probably its core competitive advantage as far as economies are concerned. It adapted out of the agricultural sector 20 years ago when it was almost entirely reliant on sugar into a well-diversified economy now. Today, sugar only accounts for 3.5% of the country's GDP. And more recently, we've seen it diversify away from some of its traditional trading partners whose economies have not been performing very well for a number of years, and refocusing on Africa. So I think as far as the financial sector is concerned, it will be the types of products and services that will be offered and developed over the coming years are essentially around the structured trade finance and risk mitigation for importers and exporters to and from Africa. I also think as far as private banking is concerned, Mauritius is coming forward with a lot of interesting investment products for individuals, which will compete with those that are offered in the Northern Hemisphere. And yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing is sticking to the core banking services, and offering those competitively, well priced, and well serviced.
Shamima, to come back to you, of course, a lot of work has gone into the diversification strategy, which you alluded to earlier. Can you give us an indication of some of the sectors that are being positioned now to begin to attract larger shares of foreign direct investment as the economy continues to diversify?
A lot of people would think that tourism would have, would be the biggest chunk in terms of the contribution to the GDP. Tourism accounts for 7% of GDP actually. And if you look at the financial services would account for around 10%. The ICT BPO industry, which has been developed over the years, today would account for about 7% of our GDP. So it's really a very diversified economy. And if you look at the new sectors, you would see that education, healthcare, which are new sectors that we've been promoting, accounts today for about 4% of our GDP. And I think the next big thing that we need to look at is the ocean economy, the development of the ocean economy. As you may be aware, Mauritius has an exclusive economic zone of 2.3 million square kilometers, so which allows for a lot of potential to be developed in the ocean economy. And today the government is looking at the development of sectors like aquaculture, seaweed development, but also looking at exploration to a certain extent. So I think if we can qualify the Mauritian economy as being a real and diversified economy.
Now, of course, Randir, this question comes to you. Shamima speaks a lot about government interventions that have enabled a diversified strategy. So, Randir, what would you say about the legislation in Mauritius? Are the regulatory frameworks enabling for doing business? And if there are some shortfalls, how do we go about plugging these gaps?
Government has brought about lots of business facilitation measures. If we see Mauritius has no natural resources, and now we are building a competitive advantage by bringing all those business facilitation measures. If we see the World Economic Forum has ranked Mauritius #1 in terms of competitiveness, the same applies for the study done by Mo Ibrahim, which ranks Mauritius in terms of governance. So all those measures and business facilitation has really created a new competitive advantage for the country, which has no resource and has to rely on its people for development.
I think we are going to wrap this conversation there, but it does seem, Colin, before I let you go from here, that Mauritius is open for doing business. Would you concur with that particular sentiment?
Absolutely. The welcome mat is out, and it's been out for quite some time. And as my fellow panelists have mentioned, there's a whole raft of reasons why Mauritius is the place to do business for Africans.
Mauritius is the place to do business for Africans, and that's where we leave it for this episode. We've come to the end of this week's edition of Invest Africa. Thanks to all our guests: Colin Grieve, Chief Representative Officer at Afrasia Bank; Shamima Mallam-Hassam, Senior Director at Mauritius Board of Investments; Randir Manek, Head of Operations, African Alliance Asset Management; and of course, Jean-Claude, Partner at KPMG.